Today, I'm walking in a little neighborhood near Greenbrae, California. It's actually kind of chilly today, guys. Look at me, I got my Metallica t-shirt on. I got this thing at the show I went to in Hollywood, Florida back in November. Exclusive shirt from the show. This is like the first time I've actually worn it because it's always so hot in Florida. I don't even wear t-shirts. But that's what I came here for, to get some of that cool Bay Area weather and get away from the Miami heat, and I'm glad I did. In the last video, we talked about how the GDP numbers were recently revised down and how consumer spending is a huge chunk of GDP. But the problem is that consumer spending is based on debt. Okay, it's not really based on what people earn, guys, and that's really the big problem. Steve sent me this story talking about how people are taking out personal loans and it makes the credit card problems look not as bad as they really are. There was a survey done by TransUnion between April of 2021 and September of 2022, and they found that borrowers who used a personal loan to consolidate their credit card debt saw their balances decrease by 57% on average. But for many, those balances returned close to their previous levels 18 months later, guys. So what does that mean? People try to get out of credit card debt by getting the personal loan, consolidate all the debt, and then next thing you know, wham, credit cards are charged back up to the max. And this is what I keep telling people over and over in my videos, that when you give someone that extra money, they'll spend it. That just seems to be the way it is now. I mean, people have no regard for saving anything anymore or trying to put a dollar away. And I understand that our dollars are being devalued in all sorts of ways, and saving might not be the best thing up until recently, now that we have higher interest rates where you can actually make a return on your dollar. But for a long time that wasn't the case. But I really think it doesn't go that deep. You know, that's a pretty sophisticated way to think about it. And I think what it really boils down to is most people just don't manage their finances, okay? If you give someone $1,000 to spend, they'll spend $1,300. And this is the real problem. LendingTree also did a similar study to TransUnion, and they found just 3 months after people consolidate their credit card debt, they already run the balances back up again. And we know this to be true because credit card balances are now at an all-time high at over $1 trillion now and climbing. There's only so many solutions to this. There's only so many ways people can get out of this until they can't. And personal loans is one of them, but if you already have a personal loan and you have too much credit card debt and you want to try to consolidate again, you won't be able to, guys. And that's the problem that I think a lot of people are running into right now that's not really being talked about, except for maybe here on my channel. And this is the same reason I'm against the mortgage rate buy downs that have been happening, because this is essentially the same thing. When you have somebody that gets a mortgage rate buy down, what they're getting is a temporary lower mortgage payment for 2 or 3 years. But the problem is, eventually, their mortgage payment is going to go back up to what it's supposed to be. And then when it does, they might not have the extra money to pay for it. And this is something that Nick and I covered in our video a few days ago. And these mortgage rate buy downs are essentially the new adjustable rate mortgages. And it's temporarily putting off how expensive the house is really going to be in a couple of years. And if this study from LendingTree and from TransUnion is any indicator of how people are treating their money, especially when it comes to their house, they're going to fall into the same trap, guys. Oh, well, you're saving $400 a month right now because of their mortgage rate buy down? Great. Well, let's go lease that new Camry. Let's go on that trip, you know, that we've all been wanting to go on. Or I think we can go out to dinner this week, honey. You know, we're saving $400 a month on our mortgage, so why not? But then what happens when people actually have to pay that extra $400 a month? It looks like probably the same thing is going to happen as what's happening when people consolidate the credit card debt. Eventually, they're going to fall right back into the same position where they're not going to have the money. Check out this apple tree. We used to have 3 apple trees in my backyard when I was growing up in Illinois, and I used to love it. Just go up to the apple tree, pick off an apple, and have an Apple anytime you want. Now, the reason that people are consolidating their credit card debt into personal loans is simply because the interest rate is a lot lower. Okay, you can pay a 10% or even a 7% interest rate on a personal loan, whereas the credit card debt is anywhere between 22 and 30% right now for most people. So it is a smart move to do that if you want to lower the interest that you're paying on that debt, but it's not smart to consolidate it and then, 3 months later, run the credit card bills back up again. That's really stupid, but yet this is what most people are doing. Because here's the problem with consolidation and all these other ways that people use to try and get out of this debt temporarily is it doesn't fix people's spending habits. Getting out of debt really requires some discipline, guys, and unfortunately doing a consolidation doesn't teach someone discipline. It just gives you a lower interest rate, but it also opens up the amount of available credit you have to spend, because now you have that personal loan debt and now you have more available credit on your credit cards to go back out and continue spending. But that's going to come to an end. And like I was saying in my last video, these great GDP numbers that we keep seeing are going to come to an end sooner than later, because if we're seeing 2% growth each quarter right now and 80% of that's based on consumer spending, what happens when people's credit cards are maxed out? What happens when you can't consolidate it anymore because you already have a personal loan? Where are things going to end up then? And this is the type of thing I keep warning people about and try to get people to start thinking about here on the channel. So here's some more details from the TransUnion study. They found out that borrowers reduced their credit card limits that they're using from 59% down to 14% on average. However, just 18 months later, those same borrowers are using 42% of their available credit, regardless of their risk tier. So this seems to be a fundamental problem in the way Americans just think about and spend money. And even though 42% is not as high as 59%, well, give it a few more months, guys, because that's only after 18 months. So what happens after 24 months passes or 36? Where are they going to be up to then? Here's some more data on this. According to LendingTree, the average balance for those who paid off between $1,000 and $5,000 in credit card debt with a personal loan saw their average balance dip from $95.41 to $7,000 2 months later. But it bounced back up to $84.76 by the 5th consecutive month after consolidation. So this also leads me to believe that people either don't have the money to pay for their lifestyle and they're basically living above their means, or they're just spending too much and they do have the money, but they just have no control over how they spend it. They're not budgeting and they're not taking care of their finances, essentially. So I don't know which one it is, probably a combination of both for different people, but regardless, it's a big problem. But yet we keep hearing all these reports on how the economy is strong because consumer spending is remaining resilient, guys. Like, this is the part that I just don't believe. I think that whatever they're telling us is complete BS right now, because it's all predicated on people continuing to borrow more and more debt to pay for their lifestyles, except that will come to an end because you can't take on debt forever, guys. At some point, when you take on too much debt and you're not paying enough of it off, creditors will stop lending to you. In fact, they might even demand some of their money back if you're not paying it back on time. So that's part of the issue as well. And at the same time, we have total unsecured loan balances growing to $232 billion in the second quarter of 2023, which is the highest level on record, according to TransUnion, and that's a 21.1% year-over-year growth. So if you're going to sit there and believe that that's normal and we can just continue going like this, clearly you've never made a budget. Clearly you've never understood how money works, guys, because it's not unlimited unless you're the Federal Reserve. And to make matters worse, guess what? 51% of people right now can't pay off their entire credit card balance each month, and they let the debt roll over from one month to the next. So you know what that means? Every single time that happens, that person is paying anywhere between a 22 and 30% interest rate on that rollover amount. And if people have, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 in credit card debt, that is a tremendous amount of interest payments that you're making every single month, whether you like it or not. And guess what? This is the first time ever since they started keeping track that this many Americans have revolving debt that's higher than the portion who paid their bill in full. So people used to pay their credit card bills in full more than they do today, to the point where 51% no longer do. Now, I still do. I use my credit cards, guys. I use my credit cards for everything because you get all the cash back and the rewards. And if you're somebody that pays off your credit card bill every single month, that can be pretty beneficial. You know, you make a lot of extra money for doing nothing, just for spending money, and that's great. Now, I don't spend extra because I have that benefit. I just spend what I need to spend and reap that reward and not pay any interest. So if you're able to do that, having a credit card can be a fantastic tool. And check this out. People have a Macy's credit card, right? The sales on Macy's credit cards actually down 36%, which is probably a good thing, given everything we just talked about. But on average, consumers who are unable to pay their bills were facing 32% interest rates on Macy's cards. And Macy's recently had to write off many of those ballooning balances because people just can't pay. So then what happens after this? Then they just send that to collections and hope that they're going to be able to recoup some of that money through collections. But the collections agency is the one taking the risk then, because they sell that debt to pennies on the dollar to the collections agency, and hopefully they can recover it. But, you know, is this how you want to run your life, guys? You want to be being chased down by collections agencies, you know, because you're not paying your credit card bills? And the saddest part to me is when I read about this is that younger borrowers are much more vulnerable to slipping into this situation where they go into delinquency and they just don't pay their bills. They run up the credit card balance and they can't pay for the whole thing anymore. Younger borrowers are falling into this trap much more than older people, simply because they've never been taught about this. They're not watching my channel. They're not watching other finance channels on YouTube. And because they don't make enough money, guys. Like, when you're younger and you just get started into the workforce, you don't have the income that somebody in their 50s and 60s have to pay it off. And you also don't have the financial discipline either, because you've never been financially wrecked before until now. And this is how you know that everything is a lie with all of this stuff. Because in a separate story, there's supposedly a summer spending surge, okay, that is driving economic growth right now. It says that Americans are spending more on groceries, recreational goods, and vehicles, and on services such as housing, dining out, and insurance. How does that mean the economy is doing well? When you hear something like that, does that mean things are looking good? No. It means we need all those things. We need to have groceries. We need to have vehicles. We need to have insurance. We need to have housing. Now, maybe you could go without dining out. You probably could go without recreational goods, but everybody needs to have a little fun sometimes, right? But yet that's supposed to be a signal that the economy is doing good because people are spending more on that stuff, guys. Wake up. That is not true. It just isn't. And I'm not sitting here trying to be like a downer or the gloom and doomer or the bearer of bad news. It's just the reality, because these are the reports that they're giving us. And if you're not smart enough to see through it, that's what I'm here for, to kind of cut through the noise, to try and wake you up. In fact, look at this graph right here of consumer spending is the yellow line, okay? The dark blue line is income from pay and benefits, and the light blue line is all income. And what do you notice? The spending is always higher than the income, which directly backs up what we just talked about, that people are spending more and more on credit cards. They're bailing themselves out with personal loans and then spending more and more on the credit cards again. That's what this shows. This graph perfectly represents that, even though this isn't even the same set of data, but it represents what we just talked about. And I get it, guys, as somebody who has been dead broke, you know, having like $5 in my checking account at one point, I understand that no matter how broke you are, everybody needs to have a little fun sometimes. I get it, because that's just part of human nature, right? And it makes working and living this whole ridiculous adult life completely pointless if you don't have some fun sometimes, no matter how broke you are. Fine. But you shouldn't do it at the expense of your entire financial future, right? The problem, I think, is so many people do that too much. They take it a step too far. They don't have self-control with it, right? Like, well, I'm gonna go out to eat tonight, and then I'm not going to do anything else again for 2 more weeks. But then a friend calls a few nights later and says, hey, let's go out for drinks. And you feel the pressure and you can't resist. And then you end up doing it. And that's how people get into trouble with it. And one thing I guarantee you is your friend that asked you to go out for drinks isn't going to be there to pay your credit card bill when the bill comes and you're past due, or you're paying $200 a month in interest now. Even Walmart is telling people now that their outlook for consumer spending has brightened since the start of the year because unemployment is low and there's solid wage growth. I guess they're not looking at the reports from LendingTree and TransUnion showing how people are just, covering up their spending habits with making bad loans to themselves, essentially. And here's how you know all of this is coming to an end. Because people are taking on more debt while simultaneously the savings rate is going down. An economist from Wells Fargo, Shannon Seary, she recently said that she doesn't expect consumers will be able to keep spending at their current pace because households are running down the savings they accumulated during the pandemic and have increased their credit card debt. And finally, it's nice to hear an economist that is thinking the way I think and realizing that the show is almost over, that this can't continue the way that it's been going because we're almost out of gas, guys. And the only way to put gas back in the tank is for the Fed to go back to QE and give stimulus to everybody and start printing more money. But we all know what that's going to do to inflation. They just told us at the beginning of this story how wage growth is up and unemployment is low, right? Well, income adjusted for inflation after taxes declined 0.2% in July, which is another sign that Americans could struggle to maintain their current pace of spending.
Here we have a triplex for sale for almost $2 million, but here's the problem. They're losing money. They bought it in March of 2022 for $1,950,000 and it's listed for sale for pretty much the same price. And guess what, guys? If they've only had it for about a year like that and they're selling it for the same price, that means this place isn't turning a profit. And by the time they actually sell it with all the closing costs and fees to sell, they're going to lose money. And on top of that, when a property gets sold here in California, the property taxes go up and by a significant amount. If you can see here, the previous owner was paying $12,000 a year, then it shot up to almost $28,000 a year in 2022 when this person bought it. So property taxes do go up in California, contrary to what some people think.
And also these job openings are starting to slow down dramatically as well. So I think there are signs that the interest rate hikes from the Fed are finally starting to work, and we are starting to see some cracks form in the economy, but it's still too soon to see a high level of distress. And that's where I think most people are making the mistake that everything is going to be fine, because if you're not personally feeling this or know someone who is, that's in these situations that we talked about earlier, then you might be oblivious to what's really going on. But I'm willing to bet a good chunk of you out there watching can relate to this or know someone who's going through one of these situations where they're just getting further and further into debt and not able to pay it off because their income literally is going down when adjusted for inflation and after all the taxes are taken out. We also know that layoffs are making a healthy comeback. In fact, one of my viewers, he actually works for T-Mobile, and he sent me the whole long email of the layoff email that was sent out by the CEO last week, and it's too long to share with you guys, but in a nutshell, they're saying that, well, hopefully this isn't going to have to happen again. We're pretty confident that this is going to be the last round of layoffs for a while and everybody else should be okay. And luckily, he wasn't affected by this, but how many other people were, guys? What about that? Then you have Farmers Insurance. They just laid off 2,400 people, okay? That's 11% of their workforce. And here's the funny thing about that. You had Farmers Insurance pulling out of Florida, pulling out of California, the most risky states when it comes to writing policies, according to them. They thought that that was going to save the company, and that's all they would need to do. Well, it turns out that that must not have been enough, because now they have to take it a step further and lay off 2,400 of their employees because their insurance company is doing that great. And of course, they just give all these ridiculous excuses like, well, we're going to be creating a more streamlined organizational structure, and we're reducing operating expenses across the country, and given the existing conditions of the insurance industry and the impact that it's having on our business, we need to take decisive actions today to be in a better position for farmers' future success. Like, yeah, in other words, things aren't going well, even though we're trying to screw everybody over and collect more premiums than we pay out. That scheme's not working out well. Our only card left is to just lay people off. And I think if this doesn't work, then you might see another insurance company like Farmers completely go under. Just like we've seen other insurance companies completely go out of business that have left the state of Florida and are insolvent now. So who knows, maybe Farmers will be next. Now they are a pretty big insurance company, so I think things would have to get really bad for Farmers to actually go insolvent and close up shop. But if they do, guys, that's going to be a huge problem for people across the country, not just if you live in California or Florida, because they write policies all over the place. So you see companies like this that are doing anything that they can to stop the bleeding, but it's not enough. And that's why I think everyone needs to pay attention to this, because when you see these companies, these industries that should be doing well, performing layoffs. I mean, T-Mobile, for God's sake, is, you know, a big mobile network provider. You know, they provide cell phone data and cell phone plans and all this to people. That's not something that you would think would ever be going down, especially in today's day and age, right? Insurance costs more than ever. How are these guys not turning a profit? Those are the things I'm asking myself and thinking something's not right. Now, there is one other thing I wanted to share with you guys here, because we just talked about earlier how it's young people that are falling into these credit card traps and delinquencies the most. And I saw another story recently talking about when you're around the age of 53 and 54 is supposedly when you have accumulated the most knowledge and experience about money, and this is the age when you make the smartest financial decisions in your whole life. Because you've gained enough experience and knowledge about money at that point, but haven't gotten old enough where you're losing your mind yet, then this is the reason why you are making good financial decisions. And no offense to anybody who's older than that, it's just a funny way of saying it, because they kind of say that, you know, once you start losing your cognitive skills, that's when you don't make good financial decisions anymore. So that could happen to anybody at different ages. And that's part of the big problem with a bunch of these younger people as well, right? They don't have the experience with using a credit card and knowing how much that can really drag you down if you don't watch your spending and pay attention to paying off that bill every month. And people just have to go through it the hard way. It happened to me too, guys. I got my first credit card when I was 18, didn't get out of debt from under that until I was like 27. So you're talking 9 years paying interest to the credit card companies because I was young and dumb. But that's the difference, right? I think that's the main thing that separates people in life, when you're able to recognize that this is a big mistake, I'm doing the wrong thing, I need to get out of this. Whereas some people just continue down that path without ever trying to correct it. And that makes the biggest difference of who succeeds and who doesn't. So even though I'm not in my 50s yet, I would like to think I'm already making some of the smartest financial decisions I could possibly make. But hey, there's always room for improvement. And, you know, making these videos helps me just as much as it helps you guys, because by constantly learning and constantly trying to keep up with what's going on in the economy and recognizing the mistakes that other people are making, to me makes it easier for you not to repeat those same mistakes. Because ultimately, I'm the kind of person that likes to learn from other people's mistakes. And when I hear people doing things like this, I know, oh, this is a bad idea. Stay away from that. So hopefully that's what a lot of you out there get from this as well. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.